Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Books for Life. We explain real ideas with simple psychology, clear science, and practical examples you can use every day.
Clear thinking starts with understanding human behavior and simple science.
Many people want to read books but don't know where to start. Some feel books are too long or hard. That is why we created this podcast, to make learning simple and clear. This is not just an audiobook. We don't just read content. We explain ideas and discuss them together. This helps you understand more deeply. We focus on ideas that can improve your life.
Paul, maybe you can give us an analogy to begin this section?
Imagine taking a test where you score in the absolute bottom 12%.
Right, just totally bombing it.
Yeah, bombing it in spectacular fashion. You didn't just fail, you were the worst in the room, but then you confidently walk out of that room, look around at everyone else, and genuinely believe you just beat the vast majority of the people in the building.
It's wild. You are just utterly, completely blind to your own incompetence.
Today, we're really looking at the hard science of why our brains pull off this incredible trick, and more importantly, why that exact same mental blind spot makes us so incredibly quick to assume that everyone around us is the idiot.
Yeah, it's a fascinating and honestly somewhat terrifying quirk of human psychology. We walk around with this profound conviction that we see the world clearly, right? And anyone who disagrees with us is just fundamentally broken.
Exactly. And that feeling, that absolute certainty that you're just surrounded by people who don't get it, it has spawned a massive multi-million-dollar industry.
Yeah.
And that is our focus today.
We have a colossal stack of sources for this deep dive.
We really do. We are tearing into a comprehensive summary of the mega bestseller book, literally titled Surrounded by Idiots. Plus, we have academic critiques of corporate personality tests and deep dives into cognitive biases like the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Right, and the illusion of asymmetric insight. We're also dissecting some pretty heavy, cutting-edge research today.
Yeah, the AI stuff.
Exactly. But before that, we have a white paper on the TEAC-DSC model, which is this attempt to force highly rigorous emotional intelligence data into those popular four-color corporate personality profiles.
And then, finally, we have computer science papers exploring automated personality detection using machine learning, which basically takes this entire labeling concept completely out of human hands.
Which is a bit dystopian, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we will. The mission for this deep dive is to figure out our absolute obsession with oversimplified labels. We're exploring why we constantly use neat little boxes to explain incredibly messy, complex human behavior.
Because it feels so undeniably satisfying to put someone in a box.
It really does. We want to know the psychology behind why it feels so good to label your coworker a red or an introvert, and the real-world dangers of swapping true empathy for, a color-coded shortcut. So, okay, let's unpack this.
I think the best place to start isn't actually with the personality tests themselves. It's with the fundamental glitch in our brain that creates the demand for those tests in the first place.
Right, we have to understand why our default setting is to misjudge the people around us.
Exactly.
Because, think about it. I don't understand how a spreadsheet works. I just tell myself, I'm lacking a bit of information. But if you don't understand the spreadsheet, I immediately think you're an idiot.
You're a nuanced human, but they are a walking stereotype.
Yes. And the sources point to a very specific, incredibly famous study from 1999 that explains this baseline delusion, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Which is arguably the most famous and probably the most heavily misunderstood cognitive bias in pop psychology right now.
Oh, people quote it all the time on the internet.
They do, and they usually get it wrong. But David Dunning and Justin Kruger tested undergraduate students on a variety of tasks. And they didn't just test obscure academic knowledge either. They tested logical reasoning, English grammar, and, wildly, their ability to appreciate humor.
Wait, I have to pause you right there. Because testing humor objectively sounds like a completely ridiculous premise for a scientific study.
Mm-hmm.
How do you even grade that? Just rate how funny this joke is on a scale of 1 to 10?
That's essentially what they did. They took jokes from professional comedians like Woody Allen and had the students rate them.
Seriously?
Yeah. Then they compared the students' ratings to the ratings given by a panel of expert comedians. The goal wasn't to see who was the funniest person in the room. It was to see who could accurately identify what was generally considered funny.
Right.
And more importantly, how good the students thought they were at identifying it.
Okay, that makes more sense. And the results across all these tests, grammar, logic, humor, they were completely uniform.
Right. Completely uniform. The participants who scored in the bottom quartile, so the absolute lowest performers, drastically overestimated their abilities.
How drastically are we talking?
Let's look at the specific numbers from the logical reasoning test. The bottom tier individuals had actual test scores that placed them in the 12th percentile.
Ouch.
Right. But when the researchers asked them to rank their own performance, they confidently placed themselves in the 62nd percentile.
Wow. They genuinely believed they were above average when they were actually hovering near the very bottom.
Exactly.
Now, I see this referenced online constantly, like people use Dunning-Kruger as this fancy academic weapon to just call someone on the internet stupid.
Oh, all the time.
The prevailing wisdom is that it basically means stupid people are too stupid to know they are stupid. Is that what the data actually says?
No, and that is a really crucial clarification. The popular internet interpretation is entirely incorrect.
Wait, really?
Yes. First of all, the Dunning-Kruger effect has nothing to do with general overall intelligence. It applies to specific skills. Oh, okay. So it's not about your IQ.
Exactly. You could be a brilliant astrophysicist, but suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect when it comes to, say, playing tennis or understanding macroeconomic policy.
Right, because you just don't know what you don't know about tennis.
Precisely. And second, the data does not show that incompetent people are as confident as experts.
Wait, really? Because the whole meme, the whole joke online is that the guy who knows absolutely nothing is the loudest, most confident guy in the room.
Well, the loudest guy might be the most confident, but that's not what the Dunning-Kruger data showed at all. If you look at the actual charts for the 1999 study, the low performers do overestimate themselves massively, yes, but their overall absolute confidence level is still lower than that of the actual high performers.
I see.
A top-tier performer might score in the 90th percentile and guess they are in the 80th. They slightly underestimate themselves.
Yeah.
A bottom-tier performer scores in the 12th percentile and guesses they are in the 60th. So the low performer's confidence is completely detached from reality.
Right.
But they still don't think they are better than the actual expert.
Right. They just vastly overestimate their own baseline. They think they're doing okay when they're actually failing.
So the expert thinks everyone is as good as they are, and the novice thinks they are slightly better than average. Everyone is basically just collapsing toward the middle.
Exactly.
But why? Like, what is the actual mechanism in the brain causing this massive blind spot?
Well, that is where the scientific community is currently embroiled in a massive debate. Dunning and Kruger's original explanation is called the metacognitive model.
Metacognitive. Thinking about thinking.
Right. The idea is that acquiring a specific skill isn't just about learning how to do the task. It's also about acquiring the mental framework to distinguish between a good performance and a bad one.
Okay, give me a real-world example of that.
Think about grammar. If you are terrible at English grammar, you don't just lack the ability to write a correct sentence, you also lack the specific grammatical knowledge required to look at a sentence and recognize that it is terrible.
Oh, I get it.
You suffer from a dual burden. You are incompetent, and your incompetence robs you of the very tools you need to realize you are incompetent.
It's like trying to measure the temperature of a room using a broken thermometer. The tool you desperately need to assess the situation is the exact same tool that is malfunctioning. So you just read the broken dial and think, yep, perfectly comfortable in here, while the house is literally on fire.
That is an excellent metaphor. The broken thermometer is exactly how the metacognitive model views it. But, and this is a massive but in the literature, a lot of scientists look at that data and say the thermometer isn't broken at all.
What do you mean?
They argue Dunning-Kruger is just a statistical illusion.
Hold on, a statistical excuse. Are you saying these people actually have self-awareness, but the math is just tricking us into thinking they don't?
Yes. Researchers like Gilles Gignac strongly argue against the dual burden idea. They claim you can explain the entire phenomenon using two very basic principles: regression toward the mean combined with the better-than-average effect.
Okay, I'm going to need you to walk me through the mechanics of that, because it sounds like we're just throwing math jargon at a psychological problem. Let's start with the better-than-average effect. What is that?
Human beings have a built-in baseline optimism about themselves. If you survey 1,000 people, the vast majority will naturally believe they are better than average at almost everything.
Which is mathematically impossible.
Right. For example, the average IQ is perfectly mathematically defined as 100. But survey people on the street and the average person will tell you they think their IQ is like 115.
Yeah, the classic driving survey. You ask a room full of people if they are an above average driver, and 80% of the hands go up.
Exactly.
Which, again, impossible. So we all walk around with a slightly inflated sense of self. How does that combine with regression toward the mean?
Regression to the mean is a statistical reality where extreme outliers on a first measurement will naturally tend to be closer to the average on a second measurement.
Okay, keep going.
Imagine you test a huge group of people on grammar. You isolate the absolute worst performers, the extreme bottom outliers. Now, you ask them to rate their own performance. Because they're at the absolute bottom, any guess they make about themselves with any degree of error is mathematically forced to point upward toward the average.
Ah, I see.
Oh.
Because they're at the bottom, there is nowhere to go but up.
Yeah.
If you score a 0, you literally cannot underestimate yourself. You can only overestimate.
Precisely. And when you add their natural built-in bias that they are probably slightly better than average to the fact that their starting point is at the absolute bottom, their self-assessment rockets upward.
That's wild.
Gignac actually ran simulations using random noise data with no human psychology involved whatsoever and reproduced the exact same Dunning-Kruger graphs. His argument is that you don't need a complex theory about broken metacognitive thermometers. The math just forces the lowest scorers to look incredibly diluted.
That is fascinating. But I have to push back a little. Even if it is a statistical illusion, there are other models in the sources, right? Like the rational model. I actually love this one because it feels so human.
Yes, the rational model.
It suggests that people just have positive prior beliefs about themselves and they do the math logically in their head.
Exactly. If you take a 10-question quiz on a topic you know nothing about, you might genuinely know the answer to 3 of them.
Right.
For the other 7, you guess. You rationally assume, well, I definitely got the first 3 right. And of the 7 I guessed on, statistically, I probably got at least 2 or 3 right by pure chance.
So you walk out thinking you got a 6 out of 10. You aren't lacking self-awareness. You are just applying a rational, optimistic formula to your own guesswork.
Yeah. And then there is the economist's favorite explanation, which is the lack of incentive theory.
Oh, right. The idea that they just don't care.
Basically, it says that people in these university studies just don't care enough to critically evaluate themselves. They speed through the test, check a box that says, I probably did okay, and leave to go get lunch.
Which is so relatable for college students. Though, to be fair to the original researchers, the sources note that when they actually offered cash prizes to participants for accurate self-assessments, the accuracy didn't really improve.
Right, the blind spot remained.
So whatever the underlying mechanism is, whether it's a broken internal thermometer or a statistical artifact of regression or just rational optimism, the external reality remains identical. We walk through life completely oblivious to the depths of our own specific incompetencies.
We do. But the problem compounds because we aren't just blind to ourselves. We are aggressively biased in how we analyze everyone else.
Which brings us to the illusion of asymmetric insight. I found this to be one of the most relatable concepts in the entire stack of research.
It's so common. It was heavily explored in a 2001 study by Emily Pronin and her colleagues. The illusion of asymmetric insight is the cognitive bias, where we perceive our knowledge of others to be vastly superior to their knowledge of us.
We think we're mind readers.
Essentially, yes. We genuinely believe we know our close friends, our romantic partners, and our roommates better than they know us.
Which, again, mathematically impossible. In a room of 10 people, everyone cannot be the most observant person who is simultaneously the most mysterious and misunderstood.
Exactly. You can't all be the enigma. Pronin's studies revealed the mechanism behind this delusion. We use 2 completely different sets of criteria for judging humans.
Okay, what are the criteria?
We judge ourselves based almost entirely on our internal, private thoughts, feelings, and intentions. But we judge others based strictly on their observable behavior.
I have a perfect analogy for this from real life. Driving.
Driving is the perfect example.
Right. If I'm cruising down the highway and someone violently swerves into my lane and cuts me off, I instantly judge their observable behavior. I label them. What a reckless, impatient, aggressive idiot. Their behavior defines their core character.
Yep.
But if I cut someone off, I don't think I'm a reckless idiot. I think, oh man, I am so stressed. My kid was screaming in the back seat. I'm late for a doctor's appointment, and there was a huge truck in my blind spot.
I judge myself by my rich, complex internal context, but I judge the other driver strictly by their external action.
That is the textbook definition of asymmetric insight. We believe that our off-the-cuff, spontaneous reactions don't represent the real us. They're just temporary reactions to environmental stress.
Because we know our own stress.
Right. But when we see someone else have a spontaneous reaction, we view it as a deep, revealing window into their permanent soul. We view ourselves as an enigma driven by circumstance. We view others as simple, transparent, and driven by fixed personality traits. And the research went even further on this. They found that if you assign a negative trait to someone, let's say you decide your coworker is arrogant, and that coworker defends themselves and says, I'm not arrogant, I'm just shy. You don't believe them.
Not at all.
You just assume they lack self-awareness. But if someone calls you arrogant, you assume they just haven't taken the time to understand the real, complex you.
When you combine all these elements, the picture is incredibly bleak. You have the Dunning-Kruger effect, inflating our sense of baseline competence. You have the illusion of asymmetric insight convincing us that we understand everyone else's motives perfectly. And you have negativity bias making us fixate on the bad things people do.
It creates a perfect storm of social friction.
It really does. We are fundamentally flawed in how we process social information. Human behavior is messy. It's incredibly dependent on context, lack of sleep, blood sugar levels, and hidden anxieties.
It takes a massive amount of cognitive energy to actually empathize with people and figure out their internal motivations.
And if there's one thing the human brain hates more than anything else, it's expending unnecessary cognitive energy. We are cognitive misers. We desperately want a shortcut.
We want a decoder ring.
Yeah.
We want a simple, easy-to-read manual that explains exactly why our boss is a micromanaging jerk and why our spouse won't load the dishwasher the right way.
Yes.
We don't want to do the hard work of empathy. We want a label. And that fundamental, desperate human desire is what built the entire commercial personality test industry.
Which transitions us perfectly from the internal psychological biases that make us crave categories to the formal systems that validate those feelings by handing us a pseudoscientific label to slap on our coworkers' foreheads.
And the undisputed king of this in recent years is the book Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erickson.
Oh, absolutely.
This book didn't just sell copies, it became a cultural phenomenon. It fundamentally changed the vocabulary of corporate environments across the globe, and it is based entirely on the DISC model.
Right, DISC, dominance, inducement, submission, and compliance.
Erickson assigned 4 very distinct colors to these traits. Let's actually break down these colors in plain English with some real-world examples, because anyone who has worked in an office in the last decade has probably suffered through a seminar on this.
At least one seminar, yeah. Let's start with red, which corresponds to dominance. According to the DIC model, reds are highly ambitious, driven, competitive, and aggressively direct.
It's a classic red.
Right. They prioritize speed, efficiency, and results over human feelings. Their major stress triggers are a lack of control, mundane, repetitive tasks, and having to deal with people who make what they perceive as stupid mistakes.
So the classic red is the executive who sends an email that just says, fix this, no greeting, no sign off, just fix this.
Yes, very terse.
If you are in a meeting with a red and you start talking about how the team feels about a project, they will literally roll their eyes, they want the bullet points, and they want them yesterday.
Then you have yellow, which represents inducement or influence. Yellows are relentlessly optimistic, highly energetic, and entirely focused on relationships.
The people persons.
Exactly. They are the persuaders and the creatives. But the model says their downside is that they are notoriously terrible listeners. They tend to turn every conversation back to themselves. They are careless with details, and they hate isolation.
We all know a yellow. They are the person who organizes the office happy hour, but completely forgets to actually book the table at the restaurant.
Or they pitch a brilliant marketing campaign, but they haven't run any of the numbers to see if it's profitable.
Right. Next is green, representing submission or steadiness. Greens are described as the bedrock of an organization.
The stable ones.
Yeah, they are patient, deeply considerate, highly collaborative, and incredibly resistant to sudden change. They prioritize stability and relational harmony above all else. In his book, Erickson actually suggests that if you are completely unsure of who you are dealing with, acting green is the best default strategy because it's the least offensive.
Greens are the ones who have been at the company for 15 years. They know where all the bodies are buried, but they never gossip. If you implement a massive new software system overnight, the Greens are the ones quietly having a panic attack because the routine has been shattered.
And finally, blue, which is compliance or analytical. Blues are deeply detail-oriented, factual, meticulous, and cautious.
The beta people.
Exactly. They are the ultimate realists, bordering on pessimists. They want to see the raw data, the source code, and the risk assessment before they make a single decision. Because they care infinitely more about accuracy than enthusiasm, they're often perceived by others as cold, detached, or overly critical.
If a yellow pitches a brilliant idea, the blue is the person who immediately points out the 3 legal liabilities in the plan.
And they aren't trying to be mean, they just physically cannot ignore the details.
Right.
Now, the core premise of Erickson's book, and the reason it resonated with millions of managers, is actually a very practical piece of communication advice. He argues that communication happens on the listener's terms.
That is the hook of the whole system. The idea is that when you speak, your message doesn't arrive pure. The recipient filters your message through their own specific behavioral style.
It's translated.
Exactly. Therefore, if you want to be effective, you cannot just communicate in the way you prefer. You have to adapt your message to the specific color of the receiver.
The book uses a fantastic analogy here. Behavior patterns are like a toolbox. A 30-pound sledgehammer is an incredible, highly effective tool if your goal is to tear down a brick wall.
Sure.
But if you are trying to hang a delicate picture frame in the hallway, a sledgehammer is literally the worst tool you could possibly pick. You have to match the tool to the task.
Right.
If you're pitching a budget increase to a blue, you don't bring hype, you bring an Excel spreadsheet. If you're pitching to a yellow, you leave the spreadsheet at your desk and bring a vision board. It sounds incredibly logical. It feels like unlocking the cheat codes to human interaction.
It really does feel that way. But what's fascinating here is the historical reality check behind this entire model.
Oh, this part is wild.
Despite its massive corporate success and the way it is presented in boardrooms as an established, ironclad scientific truth, the DISC assessment is widely considered by actual psychologists to be pure pseudoscience.
This blew my mind. I completely assumed this was developed by a team of modern organizational psychologists in a lab somewhere in the 1990s. But the sources trace this all the way back to 1928.
Yes, to a guy named William Moulton Marston. He outlined the foundational theory in his book, Emotions of Normal People.
And Marston was an interesting guy.
Marston was a wildly eccentric and fascinating historical figure. He was a prominent promoter of the systolic blood pressure test, which he claimed could detect deception.
Making it an early component of the polygraph or lie detector.
Exactly.
So the guy who invented the lie detector also invented the 4 colors.
Yeah.
How did he actually develop the DISC model? Did he run massive clinical trials?
Not at all. He generated these 4 behavioral types entirely through his own personal observations of human emotion in the general population.
Just observing people.
Just his thoughts, yeah. His theory was built on 2 axes. First, he believed people view their environment as either favorable or unfavorable. Second, they perceive themselves as having either control or a lack of control over that environment. Those 2 intersecting lines create the 4 quadrants of dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance.
So it was purely theoretical.
100%. And here's the craziest detail. Marston never developed a formal assessment tool to measure this. He never patented a test.
He just wrote the theory.
Right. The first actual self-assessment checklist wasn't created until 1956 by an industrial psychologist named Walter Clark, who just wanted a quick tool to help businesses filter out unqualified employees.
And because there was no original patent, there was no quality control.
None. Over the decades, dozens of different companies have interpreted, tweaked, and commercialized the DIC framework in 100 different ways.
Which means there is no single scientifically unified DISC test. It is a fragmented commercial free-for-all. There are countless variations, all marketed with slightly different formats, different color schemes, and different report styles.
And when rigorous psychometricians actually evaluate the properties of these commercial tests, the results are quite damning.
Yeah, the sources get pretty harsh here.
The tests often have high reliability, but absolutely zero predictive validity.
Okay, stop right there. Let's make sure we clearly define those 2 terms, because they sound similar, but mean entirely different things in science. High reliability, but zero validity. What does that mean for the person taking the test?
Reliability simply means consistency. If you step on a broken scale today and it says you weigh 500 pounds and you step on it tomorrow and it still says you weigh 500 pounds, that scale is highly reliable.
Because it gives you the exact same result every time.
Right. DISC tests are generally reliable. If you take the test today and get red, you will likely get red if you take it again next month.
But validity is whether the scale is actually telling the truth.
Exactly. Predictive validity asks, does knowing someone is a red actually tell you anything useful about how they will perform a specific task in the real world?
And the answer is?
The answer is no. A comprehensive 2013 German study looked at a highly popular DIC assessment to see if it met the basic standards of the Federation of German Psychological Associations.
And how did it do?
Well, it met the baseline requirements for reliability. It was consistent, but it failed completely and totally in terms of validity. Knowing someone's color did not predict their job performance, their leadership capability, or their stress management in any statistically significant way.
So if these incredibly expensive color-coded tests have zero predictive validity, why did my HR department just spend $10,000 having us sort ourselves into colors? Like, why does it feel so uncannily accurate when I read my results?
To understand why we fall for it, we have to look at a scathing critique from the Swedish Skeptics Association, known as
Oh, they went hard.
They were so appalled by the widespread adoption of this pseudoscience that in 2018, they actually named Thomas Eriksson Fraudster of the Year for his book.
Fraudster of the Year is quite the title.
It is. They pointed out that Eriksson, who markets himself globally as a behavioral expert, actually has no formal education or degree in the behavioral sciences whatsoever. Zero. But their critique goes much deeper than just attacking his credentials. They highlight a fundamental, incredibly common flaw in how everyday people understand psychology. A licensed psychologist named Dan Katz formalized this as the gremlin fallacy.
The gremlin fallacy. I love this concept. Let's explore exactly what this means, because it fundamentally changes how you view human behavior.
When people say, I acted that way because of my personality, they are treating the concept of personality as if it is a little invisible gremlin living inside their head.
Like a little guy pulling levers.
Exactly. They imagine this gremlin is sitting at a control panel, steering the ship and actively causing their actions. My red gremlin made me yell at the intern. But in modern evidence-based behavioral science, personality is not a biological or mechanical cause. Personality is defined merely as a pattern of repeatable behavior.
It is a description. It is not a mechanism.
Yes.
So saying, I acted that way because of my personality is pure circular reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
It literally just means I behave that way because I have a history of behaving that way. Let's use a driving analogy again from the sources.
Okay.
Say you have a coworker who always weaves through traffic at 90 miles an hour. If you take the test and say, he drives dangerously because he is a red, you feel this massive wave of relief. You feel like you've solved a mystery and explained his behavior.
And you have it.
Right. Red is literally just a label for a pattern of aggressive behavior. The label does not cause him to press his foot on the gas pedal. It just gives a convenient name to the fact that he does it. You haven't explained anything at all.
It is the illusion of explanation. The sources highlight another perfect example of this circular thinking from popular psychology. There was a motivational speaker named Mia Turnblom who claimed that having negative thoughts about yourself is caused by having low self-confidence.
Which sounds profound until you think about it for 2 seconds. Having negative thoughts about yourself is the literal dictionary definition of low self-confidence. You cannot say that low self-confidence explains low self-confidence.
It's like saying the reason it is raining outside is because we are having bad weather. Bad weather is a label we use to categorize rain, wind, and clouds. It is not the cause of the rain.
We constantly confuse labels with explanations. Think about medical diagnoses. When someone goes to a psychiatrist and says, I can't sleep, I have no energy, I cry all the time, and I feel completely hopeless, and the doctor says, I know what is wrong. You have major depressive disorder.
Right, the patient feels relief.
This immense relief. Finally, I know what is causing my pain. It's the depression gremlin. But depression is just the clinical label for that exact cluster of symptoms. It's a categorization to help determine treatment, not the etiology of the disease.
And this confusion, this gremlin fallacy, becomes actively dangerous when it is weaponized in the workplace through tools like DISC.
Yes, the Swedish Skeptics Association points this out.
When a company is facing massive internal conflicts, high turnover, or extreme stress, The root problem almost always lies in the organizational structure itself. How are decisions being made? Is the reward system fundamentally unfair?
Right. Is executive leadership communicating poorly? Are the expectations physically impossible to meet?
Exactly. But fixing a broken, toxic organizational structure is incredibly hard. It takes months, and it usually requires management to admit they are failing.
And nobody wants to do that.
No. Instead of doing that, management brings in a consultant with a stack of color-coded tests. They test the whole floor. And suddenly, magically, the problem isn't the unfair reward system anymore. The problem is that Susan from accounting is a blue and Mark from sales is yellow, and they just have a natural color clash.
It is so convenient for management.
It really is. The system individualizes a systemic problem. It labels the employees as the source of the friction. Management says, well, their internal gremlins are just acting up, rather than addressing the toxic environment that is actually creating the stress.
It provides an illusion of understanding that allows lazy organizations to completely avoid accountability.
And worst of all, it ignores the most fundamental baseline truth of human psychology. Human behavior is highly dependent on context. You cannot put a human being in a single colored box and expect them to stay there.
No. A person might be a quiet, terrified, highly analytical blue in a hostile boardroom where their boss constantly yells at them, but that exact same person might be a loud, boisterous, energetic yellow on the weekends when they're directing their community theater group.
Because behavior adapts to the environment. The sources explicitly contrast the pseudoscience of DISC with the Big Five personality traits, which is the model actually backed by rigorous scientific and statistical consensus in modern psychology.
The Big Five being openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Why is the Big Five considered science, while DISC is a parlor trick?
Because of how they were developed, DISC was a top-down theory. Marston sat in a chair, imagined 4 types of people, and created boxes for them.
Right, from his own brain.
The Big Five was developed bottom-up. Researchers took thousands and thousands of questionnaires about human behavior and ran massive statistical factor analyses on them to see which behaviors naturally group together in the real world.
Oh, so the data came first.
Yes, the data created the model, not the other way around. And crucially, the Big Five does not classify people into rigid, mutually exclusive types. It measures traits on a continuous spectrum.
So you aren't just an extrovert or an introvert.
No, you fall somewhere along a bell curve of extroversion, and your position can shift slightly depending on your environment.
So what does this all mean for us on a daily basis? I want you, the listener, to really reflect on this for a second. Think about the last time you used a label to explain someone's behavior. Maybe it was an astrological sign. Oh, he's just acting like a typical Scorpio.
We all do it.
Maybe it was a Myers-Briggs type or a DSC color. Did that label actually help you understand the messy, complex context of their life? Did it help you understand what kind of day they were having or what hidden stressors they were dealing with?
Probably not.
Or did it just give you a convenient, scientifically sounding excuse to stop thinking about it? Did the label help you empathize, or did it just help you file them away in a drawer so you could move on?
That is the pivotal question. If these models are so scientifically flawed, rely on circular reasoning, and fail completely to predict real-world performance, we are left with a massive paradox.
The paradox of practicality.
Because businesses, hospitals, and educational institutions are not stupid. They are driven by results. Yet they continue to spend millions of dollars on these assessments every single year. Why? Because despite all the scientific deficiencies we just outlined, these oversimplified labels offer incredible, undeniable, practical utility.
To explore this paradox of practicality, our sources include a deeply fascinating white paper by K.V. Petrides detailing the TEC-DISC model. Now, TEAC stands for the Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaire. Unlike DISC, TEAC is a highly respected, scientifically validated psychological tool used to measure emotional intelligence.
And this paper is wild because it fully admits right up front that DISC is deeply flawed.
It is a remarkably honest admission for a paper that is fundamentally trying to build a new DIC assessment.
It really is. The researchers openly state in the abstract that DISC lacks predictive utility, that it grossly oversimplifies the complexity of personality, and that it remains largely outside the realm of mainstream peer-reviewed psychology.
So why bother? If DISC is a 30-pound sledgehammer, why spend years of academic research trying to make a scientifically accurate sledgehammer to hang a delicate picture frame? Just throw the tool away.
Well, the paper argues they did it because it is misleading to overlook the pragmatic advantages that explain DISC's enduring appeal.
Okay, I'm listening.
They set out to extract DISC profiles from the scientifically grounded TEC data, effectively trying to build a better, more mathematically robust engine for a flawed vehicle.
Right. They recognize that DISC provides something crucial that complex statistical models like the Big Five fail to provide. A conversational bridge.
Yes, a conversational bridge. It gives lay people managers, nurses, construction workers, people without PhDs in psychometrics a common, non-technical language to discuss highly sensitive interpersonal dynamics.
Exactly. When you are trying to de-escalate a conflict on a busy hospital floor between a surgeon and a head nurse, you simply do not have time to sit them down and teach them the statistical nuances of neuroticism and agreeableness on a bell curve.
You'd lose them instantly.
The absolute simplicity of DISC, the four bright colors, makes it immediately accessible. It acts as a heuristic tool. It helps people realize, sometimes for the very first time in their adult lives, that other human beings process the world fundamentally differently than they do.
The Swedish Skeptics Association cynically mocked this, noting that DISC merely helps adults achieve a theory of mind at the level of a 5-year-old.
But honestly, sometimes fully grown adults in a high-stress workplace desperately need that 5-year-old level of realization.
It's true.
Just having a shared neutral vocabulary to say, oh, you aren't ignoring my emails to be intentionally cruel, you just process information as a blue and need more data before you respond, can instantly diffuse a massive amount of toxic conflict.
The T paper actually cites real-world examples where using DIC frameworks significantly improved teamwork in surgical residency training programs.
Really?
Yeah, and it even improved patient adherence in pulmonary rehabilitation because the doctors learned to speak the patient's language.
Because regardless of its scientific purity, the framework forces adaptation. It emphasizes that behavior is flexible and that tailoring your communication style to the receiver can yield objectively better results.
And what the TEC research did was attempt to map these 4 practical profiles against actual real-world occupational roles to see if there were meaningful patterns.
They used an enormous data set, right?
Yes, over 13,790 participants. And the findings were strikingly consistent with the original theory.
Let's dig into that occupational mapping because the data is fascinating. They found that dominance, the highly assertive Reds, were significantly overrepresented in executive and senior management positions, as well as the construction industry.
And I absolutely loved this detail from the methodology. The Reds were also significantly underrepresented in the group of people who chose I'd rather not say when asked for their industry on the survey.
They're direct. They do not hide what they do.
Which perfectly aligns with the confident, unapologetic profile of dominance. Then we have influence, the relationship-focused yellows. The data showed they were heavily overrepresented in counseling, social services, guidance, and business consultancy.
These are all roles that demand high interpersonal engagement, empathy, and constant persuasion.
Exactly. For steadiness, the highly collaborative greens, they found an overrepresentation in administrative and secretarial work, as well as health and education services.
Roles that require deep collaboration, service to others, and long-term stability.
And finally, conscientiousness, the analytical blues, were heavily overrepresented in the finance and accounting sectors, which makes perfect logical sense for a profile defined by precision, methodical analysis, and extreme risk management.
But hold on, if we look at this data, I have to challenge the conclusion here. This feels like a massive chicken and egg scenario.
How so?
Does a person naturally gravitate toward the finance sector because they were born with an inherently detail-oriented blue brain? Or does working in the highly regulated, mathematically ruthless, risk-averse world of finance actively force you to adopt blue behaviors just to survive your probation period?
Wow.
And when you finally take the test 5 years later, you just report the behaviors your job has demanded of you every day.
That is an incredibly astute observation, and it highlights the central danger of confusing a temporary state with a permanent trait. Are these tests measuring a fixed biological personality, or are they merely measuring an environmental adaptation?
It reminds me of the psychological effects of astrology. There is a well-documented phenomenon where people read their daily horoscope, internalize the traits of their zodiac sign, and subconsciously begin to act them out.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. If society constantly tells a young Leo that they are supposed to be a bold, fiery, uncompromising leader, they might just start acting like one because they think it's expected of them. If a massive corporation hires a 22-year-old, gives them a DICC test on their first day, and tells them, "Congratulations, you are a red, you are a natural-born dominant leader," doesn't that immediately become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Do we naturally fit the labels, or do we contort our behavior to fit the labels society forces upon us?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Take It Next researchers were actually acutely aware of this bias, and they attempted to mitigate it by fundamentally expanding the model. They realized that shoving the entirety of human complexity into just 4 colored boxes is far too crude.
So what did they do?
Instead of a simple 2x2 grid, they used a mathematically exhaustive 4-sphere or hypersphere structure. This allowed them to identify up to 20 distinct, nuanced behavioral styles. You aren't forced to just be D, I, S, or C. You could be a blend like DI or ISC.
And they also addressed the self-fulfilling prophecy aspect.
Yeah.
The ability to game the test to get the result you want by using a technique called semantic concealment.
This is a vital psychometric improvement. In a standard DIC test, the questions are painfully transparent. They ask things like, do you prefer to take charge in meetings?
And anyone who wants a promotion knows to check yes to look like a red leader.
Right. But the T-test asks questions about underlying emotional intelligence, where the connection to the final DIC outcome is completely opaque to the user. You can't cheat the test to look like a red because you have no idea which questions actually correlate to dominance.
It is a massive upgrade to the methodology. But as the Patride's paper itself concludes in its final pages, even with 20 blended styles and semantic concealment, you're still ultimately taking the rich, infinitely complex, constantly shifting spectrum of human emotion and forcing it into a corporate shorthand.
Yeah.
It remains a description of how someone might approach a task on a given Tuesday. It is not an explanation of their soul.
Which brings us to our final and honestly most unnerving topic. Because up until now, we have been talking about labels we actively choose to engage with. We choose to buy Thomas Erickson's book. We choose to sit down at a computer and take the T-test.
But the future of oversimplified labels isn't a questionnaire you fill out. It's a machine learning algorithm silently watching you in the background.
It really is.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources include a paper published on arXiv, the open access archive for scholarly articles, exploring the use of computational devices to automatically detect personality traits. The core premise is that if a digital device automatically knows your personality, it can customize its entire interaction with you.
It adapts to you without you even knowing.
It can adapt its tone of voice, its product recommendations, and its user interface to perfectly match your psychological profile.
And how are they gathering this data? They aren't asking you to fill out a multiple choice survey. They are analyzing your natural, unprompted interpersonal communication. The paper specifically outlines using raw data from platforms like WhatsApp. They are looking at the digital exhaust of your daily life.
Walk me through the mechanics of this, because I want to know exactly how a computer reads my text messages and decides my personality. They aren't just searching for the word sad.
Right? No, that would be too simplistic. The methodology relies on something called open vocabulary methods. Instead of looking for a predefined list of keywords, these algorithms analyze a massive, comprehensive collection of language features.
Like what?
They analyze your grammar structure. They look at your use of non-word symbols. How often do you use exclamation points versus periods? Which specific emojis do you favor when you are stressed? They use advanced mathematical techniques like latent Dirichlet allocation, or LDA, to group your words into semantic clusters.
Okay, latent Dirichlet allocation. Let's translate that into something we can all visualize. How does LDA actually work?
Imagine you have a massive library with 1 million books, but none of them have covers, titles, or genre labels. They are just scattered on the floor.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It is. And LDA is like a mathematical sorting at. It doesn't actually read or understand the story in the books. It just rapidly counts how often certain words appear together. If it notices that the words wizard, wand, and potion frequently appear in the same books, it automatically groups those books together into a new cluster. It builds the concept of a fantasy genre from scratch, purely based on word co-occurrence.
So the algorithm is doing that to my text messages. It notices that when I text my mom, I use a cluster of words associated with anxiety, and I use 3 question marks per sentence. And it uses that mathematical cluster to decide where I fall on the Big 5 personality spectrum.
Yeah.
It's basically quantifying my neuroses.
Exactly. And this isn't just theoretical research designed to make Siri sound a little more polite. The paper explicitly points out the massive, multi-billion-dollar real-world applications of this technology, particularly in political forecasting and targeted advertising.
Yes, and we need to be very clear and impartial here about the mechanical reality of this technology, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum.
Right, it's just the mechanism.
Analytical firms are currently able to procure large-scale, anonymized behavioral data about voters to create deep psychographic profiles. They determine your personality traits without you ever taking a test. And then they use those profiles to determine exactly what kind of targeted advertisement will be most mathematically effective in persuading you specifically at your particular geographic location for a specific political event.
It is Erickson's concept of the sledgehammer and the picture frame, but automated and deployed at a massive scale.
The campaign doesn't just broadcast one message.
No. If the algorithm determines from your text clusters that you are highly neurotic, cautious, and fear-driven, it automatically serves you a political ad focused entirely on external threats to your family's safety. If it determines you are highly agreeable, open, and community-focused, it serves you the exact same candidate, but with an ad entirely about social harmony and public works.
It is quite literally communicating on the listener's terms, but done by a machine.
And the technology is only getting more invasive and sophisticated. The researchers describe utilizing advanced models like VM2HL, vertex-weighted multimodal, multitask hypergraph learning.
That is a dense string of computer science jargon, but the underlying concept is profound. Let's break down a hypergraph. In a normal graph, a line connects two dots. Dot A connects to dot B. In a hypergraph, instead of a simple line, imagine casting a large fishing net that can capture and connect a dozen different dots all at once.
So what are the dots the net is capturing?
They are different modes of data. They are moving far beyond just analyzing the text you type. The VM2HL model attempts to link your extracted text patterns to physiological signals and real-time emotional states. The dots in the net are your typing speed, your location data, the subtle variations in your voice if you use voice to text, your heart rate if you are wearing a smartwatch, and your emoji choices. It captures all of these disparate signals at once, analyzes how they interact, and uses that multimodal net to constantly refine and update your psychological label.
Here is where the ultimate profound irony of this entire deep dive hits me. Think about the arc of what we've discussed today. Throughout human history, our limited biological brains simply couldn't handle the overwhelming, infinite complexity of human behavior. We didn't have the cognitive RAM to process it.
Right, so we invented crude, energy-saving shortcuts. We called people idiots. We said they were reds or blues. We invented these rigid, oversimplified psychological labels entirely because we couldn't process the massive amounts of data required to truly empathize with another person's context.
That is the fundamental function of a cognitive bias, to save energy in an overwhelming environment.
Right, but now we have invented artificial intelligence. We have finally created machines that can process massive, essentially infinite amounts of data. And AI doesn't get tired. It doesn't need to save cognitive energy. It doesn't need a shortcut.
The supercomputer could, theoretically, view every single human being as a completely unique, highly fluid, context-dependent matrix of infinite variables.
What are we actually doing with this godlike technology? We are explicitly programming the AI to categorize us using the exact same rigid, primitive Big Five or DISC labels that we invented for our own flawed monkey brains. We built a supercomputer, and we are teaching it to sort us into the same crude 1950s file folders we've been using for decades.
It is a profound and somewhat tragic paradox. We use labels like idiot or red or introvert because the human condition is fundamentally overwhelming. The world is too complex, and labeling is an energy-saving necessity. And while tools like the DISC framework or even automated personality detection can be incredibly useful starting points for communication and empathy, if they are used to bridge a gap rather than build a wall, we must constantly remind ourselves of the gremlin fallacy.
So what does this all mean? I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a moment. The next time you are sitting in a corporate retreat and you are forced to take a workplace personality test, or the next time you get violently cut off in traffic and you feel that hot surge of rage at the idiot behind the wheel, I want you to actively remember the gremlin fallacy. Remember the broken thermometer of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You are not a color. You are not a static, unchangeable label. And neither are they.
Human behavior is fluid. It changes with context, with stress, with lack of sleep, with the environment. We are all so much more complicated than the tiny, color-coded boxes we try to shove each other into. It requires a daily suspension of our own ego and a massive dose of intellectual humility to accept that the people around us are just as complex, just as confused, and just as context-driven as we are.
Empathy takes energy. Labels are cheap. And I'll leave you with this final lingering thought to mull over as you go about your day. We spent this entire time talking about how we use labels to navigate the world. But right now, in your pocket, your smartphone, your social media feeds, and the algorithms that dictate what you read, watch, and buy, they are quietly, relentlessly building a rigid, categorized psychographic profile of your personality based entirely on your past clicks and messages.
They're watching.
So ask yourself, are these algorithms merely predicting your future behavior based on who they think you are? Or, by only feeding you content, ads, and interactions that perfectly align with their oversimplified label of you, are they quietly restricting you into actually becoming the very stereotype they've assigned to you?
That is the defining problem we all need to be asking ourselves as we navigate this new digital landscape. Keep questioning the labels, both the ones you lazily apply to others and the ones being mathematically applied to you.
We hope this deep dive gave you some new tools to think about how we interact with the world and each other. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.